Hi everyone, this is my February 2017 reading wrap-up. February is a short month, but for some reason I feel like I read these books such a long time ago. I don't know why. The month sort of flew by, so let's get right to it. The very first book that I read is called Things We Lost in the Fire, and this is a collection of short stories by an Argentinian author, Mariana Enriquez, and I heard that this collection of short stories has quite dark stories. There are some very sad, depressing, and really gritty stories that are involved. One of them was about a woman who lives in like a sketchier part of town because her family owns a really nice home there and she really enjoys it. Her family doesn't understand why she's living there because it's dangerous, and there's always different homeless people on the street, and it's just lots of violence, and she's basically just on her own out there. And then she encounters a homeless boy who she has a quick little interaction with, who then goes missing, and then you just sort of never know what really happens with that. And a lot of the stories in this collection of short stories are like that. There is some sort of supernatural aspect to it, but there's also just a bunch of sinister things that are happening. Like there's one story about a ghost who used to be a murderer. There's a story about a house which is supposedly haunted. No one believes in that until 3 kids go in there and experience the horrors of that house for themselves. There's another one about a woman who moves into a new home with her husband, and then she sees things in the backyard of their neighbor. She thinks there's a child that's like chained in the backyard, and then she goes into that house to investigate, and it's just all sorts of unpleasant things and just all kinds of unpleasant settings and characters and things like that. But I like stories like that. It was very, very well written. It was a great read. I read this book very fast. So if you like those dark stories but are very unique and different, I highly recommend this book. I gave this collection of short stories 5 stars. The next book is called Faithful by Alice Hoffman, and I also gave this book 5 stars. This was the first book that I ever read by Alice Hoffman. I didn't really know what to expect. This book is about, starts out with a young girl who is in high school, and her friend decide to go out for like a car ride, and she ends up being the driver, her friend the passenger. They end up in a car crash. Her friend dies, she ends up surviving, and her life spirals out of control from then on. This book spans a few years, so then once you come back to her again, she's on her own, living in New York City and just figuring her life out. But before that time, she was institutionalized. She had a lot of problems with grief and just feeling guilty and just being very depressed, and just feeling like she has a lot of the responsibility for what happened. This book felt like real life almost. It had so many things going on there. When I was reading it, I don't know, it just felt like such a massive story, even though it really, really wasn't. And it documents her relationships with people, and for the most part in this book, I know the premise is like her and her friend were in a car crash and her friend died, but in the grand scheme of the book, that's just a very small portion in the beginning, whereas the rest of the book takes place in her daily life and her interactions with others and all the people that she meets and the jobs that she gets. And you know, all the things that happened with her family, with her friends' families. There's just so much in this book that just makes it that much more interesting to read. So if the main theme of it doesn't really sound very appealing to you, I would still recommend giving this book a chance because there's so much more in it, and it was a great, great read. I really enjoyed it. The ending was great. It was not something that I was predicting or expecting. It was just an overall a wonderful read. The next book that I finally got around to is Truth Witch by Susan Dennard. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I've had this book on my shelf for a long time, and I was avoiding it, and finally this month I decided to get around to it. So I read it, and it wasn't a bad read. I've heard mixed reviews about it. It did start out a little bit slower. It took me a while to get the hang of the world that they were living in, and just to get acquainted with all the characters and all their little backstories. So I guess that's the only downside of this book, is just learning who all the different witches are, who are the bad witches, who are the good witches, what are all their different kingdoms and worlds, and whatever else there is. So it took a while to get into. The characters were good. There was some romance in there, but I guess that's pretty standard for a YA fantasy book. I don't even know how to begin explaining it. It's about two friends. One of them is a truth witch, the other one's a thread witch. The thread witch can sort of see relationships between people. The truth witch can tell when people are telling the truth. And the two of them have a complicated relationship with their families. The thread witch is unable to go back home because they're after her. They think she's bad. She causes all sorts of trouble. The truth witch was supposed to get married off to some high up person, and she escapes that, and now they're just on a journey to wherever. I can't even remember what the places are called, but this book is like a start of their journey. They're out, they're ready to take on everybody. Great read. If you like YA fantasy books, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy this book. I might continue on with the series, but I won't promise anything at this point. The next book is Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is the second book that I've read by this author. The first book was The Great Gatsby, obviously. I gave this book 3 stars. It wasn't as good as The Great Gatsby. It was also much longer than The Great Gatsby, and what I didn't like about this book is that it kept jumping around it starts out, I guess, in the present, and then it sort of takes you back to the past. So how, like, the divers met, and divers are this fabulous couple who everyone likes to hang out with while they're at the French Riviera. They're fancy, they're fabulous, they're the coolest cats at any party, basically. So their friends try really hard to stay friends with them. There's a young girl named Rosemary who falls for Dick Diver, who is the husband, and they have a sort of an affair that spans a few years, I'd say. The book keeps jumping around, so it goes from when him and Rosemary first meet, goes back to when him and Nicole, his wife, first meet, how she had a bunch of problems. She was just really depressed and unhappy, and then he was her doctor, and that's how they met and decided to start the relationship, and then ended up getting married. So you get to see how they met, what their relationship was, and then you also get to see, like, after that, after the whole initial time that Dick and Rosemary met, then you see it sort of near the end. Like, I don't know, a few years went by from their first meeting, and they're meeting again, and things start to happen. So that's basically the gist of the book. My biggest thing is that the book turned out to be very sad. Like, throughout it was interesting, but the ending, I couldn't help but feel very sad. And they remind me of The Great Gatsby a lot, that the books are very engaging, and there's so many relationships, romance, intrigues, and what have you, but at the end, the ending is just, I don't know, I was very saddened by it, but I think that might just be the writing style and the kinds of stories that he tells. So overall, it was a good book. I wish it was shorter. I think they may have been a bit more enjoyable for me, but it wasn't a terrible read. It was just long and complicated with all the backstories and future stories and things like that. The last book that I read is called Americana, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This is my second book that I read by the author. I really enjoyed both of the books. This book it was just so interesting in terms of the main character moving to America from Nigeria, and getting used to all the customs and the way people interact and the way that people are, and just catching on to subtle little things that living here you don't really notice very often. And when you move to America or North America even, you might not be used to it initially. So it was a very, very interesting look at that, and I thought the story was great. It reminded me a lot of Behold the Dreamers, which I read a few months ago. It was very similar in terms of their interactions, their connections to their family, the family dynamics, and just the overall culture, and you know, how they're all working through their connections, and it's all through friends, and their friends back home are always relying on them when they come back. They're asking for favors, they're asking for money, so it was just very interesting to see that sort of similarity in the relationships to their friends and family back home. This book had an interesting narrative. It was from different people's perspectives. The main character had a few romances as well, so that was neat. She ended up moving to America as a student to go to college, and then she ended up getting a job and living here and getting a green card and then getting a citizenship. So it's a very vast story, and in the end she ended up going back to Nigeria, which was very, very interesting as well. And the only thing that I didn't like about this book is probably the relationships. Like, near the end of it, I felt like her relationships with her ex-boyfriends consumed the book and made the ending very sort of, I don't know, very superficial. Like the whole book was about her relationship with this guy, and I don't know, I didn't like that. That's the only thing that I didn't enjoy. I just wish it was more about her creating her life and not focusing all of that so much on the man that she had a relationship with, basically. So that's my biggest disappointment. I just thought the book would end on like a more, I don't know, not inspirational, but I don't know, just I didn't like the ending with her and the guy. It just made the whole book seem very surface level. I don't want to say romance, but I don't know, that took it away from me. I really loved the book. I just wish the ending was a little different, that it was about life and not about the relationship with a married man, basically. So that's, I guess I'll just stop there, because I'll just keep rambling on about it. So that's it for my February books. Please let me know if you read any of these books, and also please let me know what you're reading right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.